Welcome to Southwest Desert, where adventure meets the arid beauty of the American Southwest. Join us as we explore the rugged landscapes, uncover hidden historical gems, and dive deep into the rich legends and culture of this iconic region. Subscribe now and hit the bell icon so you don't miss out on the latest desert adventures. Please leave a like or comment. This is very helpful. Let's journey together into the heart of the Southwest Desert. It's midnight in the Arizona Territory, 1886. A group of men quietly approach the courthouse in Mineral Park, a silver boomtown high in the Surbat Mountains. They're armed, determined, and about to pull off what might be the most unusual heist in Wild West history. Their target? Not gold, not silver, but something far more valuable to a growing territory: government records. This midnight raid would mark the beginning of the end for one of Arizona's most fascinating forgotten towns. Welcome to Southwest Desert, where we uncover the hidden stories of the American Southwest. Today we're diving into the rise and fall of Mineral Park, Arizona, a town where fortunes were made and lost, where cultures clashed and coexisted, and where the harsh realities of desert life shaped every aspect of daily existence. Our story begins in the early 1860s, when the first prospectors, soldiers from Fort Mojave and veterans of the California gold fields, ventured into the juniper-covered slopes of the Surbat Range. What they found would spark a silver rush that would draw hundreds to this remote corner of the Arizona Territory. Their initial discoveries, including the legendary Moss Mine and the Gold Road locations, hinted at the mineral wealth that lay hidden in these mountains. But they weren't the first to value these lands. The Wallapai, or Hualpai Indians, had long considered this area their ancestral home, particularly prizing the region's turquoise deposits. The relationship between the newcomers and the Wallapai was complex and often contradictory. White settlers, in their less charitable moments, spoke of them dismissively, yet the historical record shows a more nuanced reality. The Mojave Miner, the local newspaper, observed that while there were sometimes issues with intoxication, notably reporting more intoxicated women than men on the streets, the Wallapai were generally peaceful when sober and had never attacked the mining camp's citizens. This complex relationship is perfectly illustrated by the story of Wallapai Charlie, a local character who frequently interacted with the white community. In January 1882, Charlie found himself in trouble after consuming what the records delicately call firewater. Usually good friends with a settler named Jeff, their relationship soured under the influence, leading to an intervention by Undersheriff Collins and the confiscation of Charlie's pistol. What makes this story remarkable is the letter Charlie later wrote to Sheriff Bob Steen, requesting his pistol's return and promising to be a good Indian and never carry the weapon into town again. A small but telling example of how two cultures attempted to navigate their shared space. The town that emerged was named for its park-like setting among the junipers, situated on the western slope of the Surbat Range. The rich silver deposits that drew miners to this spot would shape every aspect of the community's development. But there was nothing park-like about the challenges its residents faced. Consider the water situation. The local streams, heavy with mineral content and contaminated with solutions and salts, were essentially undrinkable. The solution: enter Harris Solomon and his mule train, making regular runs to Keystone Spring to keep the town hydrated. Just getting to Mineral Park was an adventure in itself, one that perfectly illustrates the isolation of these frontier communities. Let's trace the journey a newcomer would have to make. First, you'd take the Union Pacific to San Francisco, then travel to Los Angeles and on to Yuma. From there, you'd catch a steamer up the Colorado River to Hardyville, and then Then you'd wait, sometimes for a week, for a stagecoach to take you over dim trails and cactus-studded hills, often in temperatures exceeding 100 degrees. The stage service itself was a testament to frontier entrepreneurship. Hugh White and Company ran an express service, while A.L. Simons operated the crucial Mineral Park Kingman route. This 15-mile journey took 4 hours and cost $2, a significant sum in those days. But the service was vital for connecting the isolated mining community to the outside world. By 1884, despite its remote location and harsh conditions, Mineral Park had grown into a substantial community. The town boasted 500 registered voters and an equal number of women and children. They built their lives around 4 saloons, a restaurant, a blacksmith shop, a hotel, and multiple stores. They even had a school, though notably, no bank and no permanent church. Instead, traveling ministers would conduct services in the local pool hall, and a non-sectarian Sunday school operated for the children. The merchants acted as informal bankers, safekeeping their customers' valuables, though a proposal for a proper bank, with capital between $30,000 and $100,000, never materialized. The economics of desert isolation shaped every aspect of life in ways that modern Americans might find hard to imagine. Everything had to be hauled 400 miles across the desert, leading to astronomical prices: bacon at $1 per pound, sugar at 35 cents, flour at 50 cents. A day's labor, 10 hours of backbreaking work, earned you $3. Even the buildings themselves told a story of hardship. Lumber had to be transported 40 miles from the Alpine mountains at $125 per 1,000 board feet. Many turned to adobe construction instead, though this could prove fatal. The Steen family learned this in the most tragic way when their adobe home collapsed during the rainy season, killing the parents while miraculously sparing their children. The social fabric of Mineral Park was as complex as its physical challenges. The saloons, those ubiquitous institutions of the Old West, engaged in their own price wars, with debates over whether to charge the standard quarter or the Spanish real for drinks, a controversy that gave rise to the term 2 bits. The merchant community was equally competitive, sometimes violently so. Take the fierce rivalry between the Crider brothers and their competitors, Welton and Grounds, which escalated into what locals called the Crider-Haas conflict. The Criders held the advantage of running the post office from 1879 to 1886, but accusations flew that they were withholding mail from their rivals. The situation eventually erupted into violence and a $3,000 bail incident, a fortune in those days. This wasn't just business competition. It was a battle for control of the town's commercial future. The town's infrastructure grew along with its population. The school board purchased an old building and added a 220-square-foot teacher's platform, creating an educational space for the community's children. When the hospital burned down, the Palace Hotel stepped in to house patients, demonstrating the community's ability to adapt to crises. But the death knell for Mineral Park came from an unexpected source: progress itself. In 1883, the Atlantic and Pacific Railroad laid tracks 15 miles away, establishing a new town called Kingman. The railroad's arrival necessitated the construction of new roads for ore transport, but more significantly, it shifted the region's center of gravity. Suddenly, the arduous journey to Mineral Park seemed unnecessary when Kingman offered easier access to the same mining region. The Mojave Miner newspaper initially scoffed at the idea that Kingman could replace their thriving community, but they would soon eat those words. The final blow came in 1886 with the county seat election. The results tell the story of a changing territory. Kingman received 271 votes, Hackberry 132, and Mineral Park, once the region's crown jewel, a mere 99. But the old guard wouldn't go quietly. They demanded a recount, stalling the transfer of power. That's what led to our opening scene, the midnight raid to seize the county records and forcibly relocate them to Kingman. The decline that followed was swift and irreversible. Buildings were abandoned, fires and vandalism took their toll, and the adobe structures began their slow melt back into the desert. The Chinese community that had been part of the town's fabric dispersed, along with many other residents who sought opportunities elsewhere. Today, Mineral Park stands as a ghost town, with only a single operating mine where hundreds once worked. The historic cemetery holds the stories of those who lived, loved, and died in this remarkable place. Perhaps most poetically, the juniper trees that gave the town its name still provide habitat for western bluebirds, singing their songs over the ruins of what was once one of Arizona's most promising settlements. The story of Mineral Park is more than just another boom and bust mining tale. It's a testament to human adaptability, to the complex relationships between different cultures thrust together by circumstance, and to the brutal honesty of desert life. It reminds us that every ghost town was once someone's home, every crumbling building once housed dreams, and every abandoned main street once bustled with life. In the end, what happened to Mineral Park wasn't just about silver playing out or railroad tracks being laid in the wrong place. It was about the eternal dance between progress and tradition, between the promise of the new and the comfort of the established. The midnight raiders who stole away with those county records weren't just participating in a political coup. They were helping to write the epitaph for a way of life that would soon vanish from the American West. This has been Southwest Desert. Join us next week when we explore another forgotten chapter of the American Southwest. Until then, remember, every ruin has a story, and every ghost town was once someone's American dream. Welcome to Southwest Desert. I'm your host, Alan, and today we're uncovering the extraordinary story of Wick Hall, the desert town of Salome, and a famous amphibian who never learned to swim. It's a tale that made its way from a humble mimeographed newspaper sheet to the pages of the Saturday Evening Post, capturing America's imagination along the way. If you've heard of Mark Twain's celebrated jumping frog of Calaveras County, get ready to meet its spiritual successor, the Salome frog. But to understand this peculiar amphibian's tale, we first need to meet its creator, a remarkable character named Wick Hall. The year was 1877, and in the quiet town of Creston, Iowa, a boy named DeForest Hall was born. Now, you might be wondering how DeForest Hall became Wick Hall, and that's where our story really begins to get interesting. After finishing college and serving in the military, young DeForest did what any sensible person would do. He started collecting rattlesnakes in Florida. But his life would take a dramatic turn after visiting the Nebraska State Fair, where a display of Hopi Indian culture captured his imagination. With just $14.35 in his pocket and adventure in his heart, the 21-year-old headed west to Arizona. What happened next sounds like something out of a novel. The young man found himself working as a census taker for the Hopi tribe, and they didn't just accept him, they embraced him. This wasn't just some superficial connection. Hall immersed himself completely in their world, donning traditional Hopi clothing and studying their customs with the dedication of a scholar. He witnessed their sacred ceremonies, including the legendary snake dance. But more than that, he became a student of their artistic traditions. Hall spent countless hours studying their drawings, examining ancient petroglyphs, and decoding the symbolic designs that had been passed down through generations. The Hopi formally accepted him into their tribe, a rare honor for an outsider, and this deep connection to their culture would later influence his unique way of looking at the world and his distinctive artistic style. The experience taught him something crucial, that humor and wisdom could transcend cultural boundaries, a lesson he'd carry with him throughout his remarkable career. But our friend wasn't done wandering yet. He made his way to Pleasant Valley, where he became what he called a community vegetable gardener. Now, this was during the infamous Pleasant Valley Range Wars. It was during his next adventure, as editor of the Wickenburg News Herald, that DeForest Hall transformed into Dick Wick Hall. The paper might have struggled financially, but it gave birth to his unique brand of humor and his love for the written word. Now, here's where the story takes an unexpected turn. Hall and his brother Ernest, who would later become Arizona's Secretary of State, got word of a gold discovery. A prospector named Shorty Alger had found gold worth $100 per pound in what would become Salome. The brothers claimed 100,000 acres, and while Shorty's hole yielded $30,000 before running dry, it was just the beginning of the area's development. The town of Salome, named after Grace Salome Pratt, began to take shape, but not in the way you might expect. This wasn't your typical Boomtown story. You see, after the gold rush subsided, the Hall brothers didn't just pack up and leave. They had a bigger vision. They drilled wells, formed the Grace Valley Irrigation District, and even started the Glory Hole mine. They were building for the future, not just chasing the next strike. The early buildings of Salome tell their own fascinating stories. Take the E.S. Jones store, for instance. Jones had already moved his store twice before, from Wickenburg and Congress, following the ebb and flow of frontier commerce. But when he planted his flag in Salome, north of the railroad tracks, he refused to budge, even when the highway development suggested he should. The Blue Rock Inn became the heart of the community, run by Mrs. Jones and her 3 daughters, Huey, Lucy, and Dorothy. But here's where the story gets really interesting. The town needed a school, and in true frontier fashion, they converted a failed saloon into a classroom. One of Jones's daughters took up the role of teacher, and to meet the minimum requirement of 8 students, they had to enlist the teacher's sister to attend classes too. But the real magic began when Hall started his own newspaper, the Salome Sun. Now, this wasn't your ordinary newspaper. It was a mimeographed one-sheet creation, born to promote Hall's Laughing Gas station. And it was here, in these humble pages, that the legendary Salome Frog made his debut. Picture this, a 7-year-old frog who had never learned to swim. Not his fault he never had a chance. Carrying a canteen in every cartoon illustration. This little amphibian captured the hearts of readers nationwide when his stories made it to the Saturday Evening Post in the late 1920s. The frog's origin story was as colorful as the character himself. Supposedly hatched from what was mistaken for a wild duck egg found in Owens Valley, California, the frog was raised on bottled Shasta and Pluto water. But it was the famous Palo Verde Pete story that really cemented his place in Arizona folklore. The Salome Sun itself was a masterpiece of frontier humor, but it was also a brilliant piece of marketing. You see, Hall created it primarily to promote his Laughing Gas station, responding to the new highway construction near Salome. But what started as a simple promotional tool became something far more significant. Picture this, a single mimeographed sheet, its masthead proudly declaring, "The Salome Sun where she danced," a clever biblical reference with an added disclaimer about hot sand and shoes. The paper featured a cast of quizzical characters, including not just our amphibian friend, but also a caricature of the biblical Salome herself. His population growth jokes became legendary. 100% a year, 19 people in 19 years, he'd write, with the kind of deadpan delivery that would make Mark Twain proud. But the Sun wasn't just about jokes. It was practical, too. Hall would draw detailed maps for customers, complete with helpful notations about bumps and curves. Even his failing typewriter became part of the charm. When certain letters stopped working, Hall didn't replace the machine. He adapted, using capital letters when needed, creating a distinctive style that became part of the paper's personality. It was as if the very limitations of frontier life became fuel for his creativity. Sadly, Dick Wick Hall passed away in 1926, marking the end of an era for Salome. The town that had grown through his humor and vision seemed to pause in its tracks, as if taking a moment of silence that stretched into years. Many of the buildings from Hall's time still stand, though most remain unoccupied silent sentinels to a more vibrant past. In a way, the story of Dick Wick Hall and the Salome Frog represents something uniquely American: the ability to find humor and hope in the harshest of conditions, to build community through creativity and wit, and to leave a legacy that continues to bring smiles to faces nearly a century later. This has been Southwest Desert. Join us next week when we explore another fascinating story from the Southwest frontier. Until then, remember, sometimes the most extraordinary tales come from the most unexpected places. Picture this. You're hiking through the Rocky Mountains of Colorado when suddenly you discover the weathered remains of a once bustling frontier town. But here's something most people don't realize. Colorado actually had two ghost towns named Alpine, located relatively close to each other. Today on Southwest Desert, we're exploring the fascinating story of these twin Alpines and how they rose and fell during Colorado's gold rush. Alpine proper's story began in 1877 when the first house was built. The town was incorporated in 1879 and maintained a population of around 500 people for many years. The economic backbone of the community was the Tilden Smelting and Sampling Works. Colonel Chapman's mill employed 40 men and processed an impressive 30 tons of ore daily. The major mines fueling this activity were the Tilden, Livingston, and Brittenstein. A key advantage for Alpine proper was its location along the Denver, South Park, and Pacific Railway. This narrow-gauge railroad connected the remote mining town to Denver. The railway was essential for transporting both people and the valuable ore being extracted from the surrounding mountains. The town quickly developed substantial infrastructure that rivaled many other settlements in the region. Alpine boasted multiple stores and hotels, including the popular Arcade and Badger establishments. Contrary to travel writer George Crowfoot's report of just 2 saloons, historical records show the town actually had 23 saloons, a testament to the social life of this mining community. Alpine even had its own newspaper called The True Fisher, which later moved operations to the nearby town of St. Elmo. The town supported 3 banks to handle the flow of mining wealth, and a school opened by George Knox in 1881 for the children of mining families. Interestingly, historical accounts conflict on whether Alpine ever had a church. Some sources claim none existed, while others report there was one. Despite its promising start, Alpine proper had a relatively short lifespan. By 1882, just a few years after its founding, it had already begun losing population to nearby St. Elmo. The town's decline followed a pattern common to mining communities when opportunities shifted elsewhere. Among the final residents were 2 particularly colorful characters: Lady Zabriskie, reportedly a Polish princess who wrote extensively about uranium and molybdenum long before their value was widely recognized, and a man known as Napoleon Jones. Their story ended tragically when both were found frozen to death in 1930, their bodies retrieved by county commissioners who ventured into the already abandoned town. After the town's abandonment, the property was acquired by Bird Fuqua. As road construction made the area more accessible to the general public, vandalism unfortunately increased, and many remaining structures were systematically stripped of anything valuable, a common fate for ghost towns throughout the West. Now let's turn to the second Alpine, commonly known as Alpine Tunnel, located near the first Alpine. Alpine Tunnel represented an extraordinary feat of engineering for its time. The project began when ex-Governor John Evans funded efforts to extend the Denver, South Park, and Pacific Railway to the booming mining region around Gunnison. James A. Evans served as the engineer for this monumental undertaking, tasked with conquering the Continental Divide. Construction bids were let in November 1879, and work began in earnest in 1880. Building at 11,600 feet presented immense challenges rarely faced in railroad construction of that era. Some 10,000 workers cycled through the project, with most lasting only 2 to 3 days due to the punishing altitude and harsh conditions. Workers faced numerous technical obstacles: loose stone that would not hold, underground water seeping into their work, and decomposed granite that made excavation exceptionally difficult. These conditions necessitated the use of California redwood for timbering, an expensive imported material that had to be transported great distances. Despite these challenges, the 805-foot redwood line tunnel was completed just before Christmas 1881. Unlike Alpine proper, the settlement around Alpine Tunnel was never officially incorporated as a town. It began as a tent city during construction, gradually acquiring more permanent structures as the project progressed. By winter 1881, the site had a stone engine house, telegraph shack, and an Armstrong turntable and switch to service the trains. By 1886, the settlement had expanded considerably to include a stone section house measuring, an imposing engine house, a bunkhouse measuring, a storehouse, and a wash house. A wooden telegraph office completed the facilities, connecting this remote outpost to the wider world. The eastern end of the tunnel featured a settlement called Atlantic. While never a proper town, Alpine Tunnel was listed as a station stop with meal service and served as a location for train passing and crew rest, essential functions for the railroad's operation through such challenging terrain. The history of Alpine Tunnel is marked by several disasters that foreshadowed its ultimate abandonment. In March 1884, a train whistle triggered a devastating avalanche that destroyed the nearby town of Woodstock, highlighting the precarious nature of mountain railroading. In 1906, fire ravaged the site, destroying all wooden buildings and causing even the stone structures to collapse, revealing that they had been built without mortar, a troubling shortcut in construction. Following this disaster, a new boarding house was built, but it would serve passengers and crew for only a few more years. The final blow came in 1910 when a tunnel cave-in killed 4 to 5 workers who succumbed to coal smoke gas. Remarkably, these were the only casualties in the tunnel's operational history. Following this tragedy, the tunnel was never reopened for rail traffic. Multiple factors contributed to the route's abandonment. Excessive snow removal costs made it financially unsustainable. The route proved ultimately unprofitable. Competition from Colorado Midland and Rio Grande lines reduced its strategic importance, and a rock slide between the tunnel and the first palisade created yet another expensive obstacle. Eventually, the tracks were completely removed, and nature began the slow process of reclaiming this remarkable feat of engineering. The parallel stories of Colorado's twin Alpines illustrate the classic boom and bust cycle that characterized so many mining communities of the American West. Both towns had relatively short lifespans and now exist primarily as historical ghost towns, their brief moments of prosperity long since faded into the mountain landscape. Alpine proper represents the archetypal mining town, quickly established around mineral extraction, briefly prosperous with its 23 saloons and 3 banks, and then abandoned when economic opportunities shifted elsewhere. Alpine Tunnel showcases the extraordinary lengths taken to connect remote regions by rail, regardless of the geographical challenges posed by Colorado's formidable mountains. Together, these twin ghost towns offer us a fascinating window into a formative period in American history when the western frontier was being rapidly transformed by industrial technologies and economic ambitions. Their remnants stand as reminders of the tenacity of those who carved communities from these rugged mountains, however temporarily. Both Alpine communities rose with great promise and faded with surprising speed, a common pattern throughout the mining West. Their stories remind us that even the most ambitious human endeavors exist in a complex relationship with the natural environment and economic realities. Next time you find yourself driving through the Colorado Rockies, perhaps spare a thought for these forgotten alpine towns and the ambitious dreams they once represented. If you would like to contribute to my channel, join my Patreon community and discover my art print products on my website in the links provided in my description. Also, if you would like a particular image from my videos, give the timestamp for the image, and I will upload it to my website and Patreon. Thank you. Welcome to Southwest Desert, where we uncover the extraordinary stories that shape the American Southwest. I'm your host, Alan, and today we're diving into a tale that begins with a prophecy of death but becomes a legend of silver, survival, and the indomitable human spirit. A lone prospector trudges through the scorching Arizona desert, his tools strapped to his mule. The year is 1877. As he heads out from Fort Huachuca, a soldier calls out mockingly, "The only stone you'll find out there is your tombstone." Little did that soldier know, he was inadvertently naming what would become one of the most infamous towns in American history. That prospector was Edward Schieffelin, and his story is a masterclass in persistence. But before we dive into the silver strikes that would make him a legend, let's talk about what it took to even survive in this unforgiving landscape. Imagine walking through terrain where every bush might hide a Gila monster, where rattlesnakes sun themselves on the very rocks you need to examine, and where the most feared Apache warriors in the territory consider you an unwelcome intruder in their land. This wasn't just any Apache territory. This was the homeland of Cochise himself, whose stronghold in the Dragoon Mountains loomed just a few miles from where Schieffelin was prospecting. The San Pedro River Valley might have looked promising for silver, but it was also promising for a quick and violent death. The Apache here were known as the most tenacious and vindictive tribe against white settlers, and Schieffelin was walking right into their backyard. But here's what made Schieffelin different from your average prospector. His journey hadn't started in Arizona, far from it. He'd spent years searching across the American West, from the evergreen forests of Oregon to the sun-baked hills of California, through the Nevada desert, and finally to southern Arizona. Most prospectors would move on after a few unsuccessful attempts, but Schieffelin had developed an almost obsessive focus on this particular area near the San Pedro River. His methodology was unlike anything the other prospectors were doing. While most would rush through territories, Schieffelin practically crawled across the ground, examining it inch by inch. He was looking for what prospectors called float, pieces of mineral-rich rock that could lead him to the mother lode. The military scouts he initially worked with thought he was crazy. Maybe he was, but sometimes it takes a special kind of crazy to change history. Initially, Schieffelin tried working with the soldier scouts from Fort Huachuca, but he felt too restricted by their protection. That's when he made the decision that would either make him or kill him. he declared his intention to work independently. The soldier's mockery about finding his tombstone didn't deter him. If anything, it seemed to fuel his determination. And then it happened. Against all odds, Schieffelin made his first strike, the tombstone claim. Now, this first discovery wasn't quite the bonanza he'd hoped for, and he sold it for minimal capital. But it was just the beginning. Soon came the real prizes, the lucky cuss, the tough nut with its erratic load breaking due to faulting, and the contention. That last one sold for $10,000, and in its first 5 years yielded $5 million in silver. In today's money, we're talking about an absolutely staggering return on investment. But here's where our story takes an interesting turn, because Schieffelin's success wasn't just about finding silver, it was about what he did after finding it. Let me tell you about another prospector, Bob Womack. Like Schieffelin, Womack was a dedicated prospector who made a major strike. Both men had stubborn faith in their chosen locations, and both eventually made successful discoveries that proved them right. But while Womack's story ended in poverty and alcoholism, unable to attract significant investors or properly develop his find, Schieffelin played his cards very differently. Schieffelin immediately made the right contacts and maintained control of multiple companies he formed. He partnered with his brother Al and a man named Richard Gerd, turned down a $150,000 offer for their remaining claims, and became a central figure in city development and history. Now, let's talk about what happened when news of these strikes got out, because this is where our story transforms from a prospector's tale into something much bigger. The claims themselves were restricted to 600 by 1,500 feet, but what grew around them was anything but small. Imagine watching a city literally spring up from the desert floor. Tombstone wasn't just thrown together. It was carefully planned, built on sloped land with streets arranged at angles from the compass directions. The major thoroughfares tell the story of the town's character. You had your numbered streets, of course, but then there was Toughnut Street, named after one of the original claims. Allen Street became the main street, while Fremont Street and Safford Street rounded out the major arteries of this growing boomtown. But what made Tombstone truly unique was its remarkable diversity of establishments. Yes, you had your saloons. In 1880, Allen Street alone had 110 liquor licenses. Every other building was a place to drink, and 14 different establishments ran continuous faro games. The OK Corral, the Birdcage Theater, the Cosmopolitan Hotel, and Campbell and Hatch's Pool Hall became landmarks in their own right. But here's the fascinating contrast. Among all this revelry, you also had 4 churches, several dancing schools, a Masonic hall, and the Knights of Pythias quarters. And then there was the Tombstone Club, a sophisticated gathering place that functioned as a library, offered book and periodical rentals, and hosted intellectual discussions about plays and politics. It became a forum for the more genteel aspects of life, proving that Tombstone wasn't just about gambling and gunfights. The population of Tombstone evolved in fascinating ways. The original settlers were mostly prospectors, miners, and assay men, the backbone of any mining town. But as the silver strikes proved their worth, the town began attracting a more colorful crowd. This is when the legendary figures started arriving: Wyatt Earp, Doc Holliday, Bat Masterson, Luke Short, and characters like Turkey Creek Johnson, who came from Deadwood and served as a volunteer sexton. Johnson became famous for inviting his opponents to meet him at the cemetery. By its peak between 1880 and 1890, Tombstone had swelled to approximately 15,000 people. The business statistics from this period are staggering. We've already mentioned the 110 liquor licenses on Allen Street, but consider this. Every other building was a saloon. 14 faro games ran continuously, and there were multiple houses of what the polite society of the time called dubious respectability. Speaking of which, let's talk about Tombstone's famous or infamous red light district, the Birdcage. Theater wasn't just a theater. It was where girls worked as performers, offered customer dancing, and promoted what they delicately termed friendly relations. The district had managed brothels under madames, independent operators who maintained private cribs and solicited from doorways, and street workers who avoided sharing earnings with procurers. Some of these women became legendary figures in their own right. There was Rowdy Kate, Blonde Marie, Irish May, and Crazy Horse Lil. But perhaps the most notable was Dutch Annie, who built brothels on Wyatt Earp's land and leased property from him. When she died, her funeral procession included 1,000 buggies and was attended by businessmen and city officials. It was the second largest funeral in town history, topped only by Schiefelin's own final farewell. But like all boomtowns, Tombstone faced its share of challenges, and they came primarily from below ground. The deeper the mines went, the more water they encountered. The Grand Central Pump was a marvel of engineering, standing 30 feet above its foundations and costing $300,000. It drained the entire mining district. But with great innovation came great conflict, as mines argued over shared expenses. Then came the fires. The pump house burned, the contention operations were damaged, and temporary closures followed. There were attempts at recovery. In 1901, a consolidated pumping system was reaching depths of 1,080 feet and pumping 8 million gallons daily. The town briefly revived, with the Birdcage Theater reopening and the saloons and bawdy houses resuming operations. But eventually, the costs of keeping the water out exceeded the value of what was coming up from the ground. In 1914, the Phelps Dodge Corporation bought the Tombstone Consolidated Mining Company for just $30,000 at a receiver's sale, a fraction of what single claims had once sold for. It seemed like Tombstone might go the way of countless other mining towns, fading into the desert from which it had sprung. Yet unlike so many other boom towns that simply vanished when the money ran out, Tombstone refused to die. Many of its original buildings still stand today, a testament to the solid construction and determination of its founders. The OK Corral, the Birdcage Theater, and many other original structures continue to draw visitors from around the world, eager to touch a piece of authentic American history. And what about Edward Schieffelin, the man who started it all? His grave sits on a hill above the town, near his first discovery. The marker reads simply, "This is my tombstone," a final joke on those soldiers who mockingly predicted his death. Perhaps the most remarkable thing about Tombstone isn't the amount of silver it produced, though that was substantial. It's not even the famous gunfights or the colorful characters, though these have become legendary. No, what's truly remarkable about Tombstone is its resilience. Through fires, floods, Apache raids, and the boom and bust cycle that killed so many other mining towns, Tombstone has endured. They call it the town too tough to die, and it's more than just a catchy nickname. It's a testament to the spirit of the American West, a spirit of determination, reinvention, and survival against all odds. While the silver that made it famous may be gone, the stories, the buildings, and the spirit of this remarkable place live on, reminding us that sometimes the greatest treasures aren't what we pull from the ground, but what we build upon it. Thank you for joining your desert frontiersman Alan for another Southwest tale. Join us next time as we uncover another extraordinary tale from America's Southwest past. Check out my large Southwest catalog of videos and playlists on historical tales, legends, lost gold stories, and adult bedtime stories. Happy trails.